Now let me discuss about what is called as the clinical trials, right? Clinical trials. Now if you take this clinical trials, remember, like before a new drug comes to the market, it is extensively tested in animals and in vitro studies for the safety and as well as the efficacy. And after its safety and efficacy is tested, then that particular drug will come into the market. Okay, so remember, what do you mean by the word clinical trials is before the drug enters into the market, right? Before any new drug enters into the market, this particular drug, it is extensively tested, right? This is extensively tested in animals and in vitro studies, right? Extensively tested in animals and in vitro studies for safety and efficacy, right? For the safety and as well as the efficacy. Now, if the drug is found to be promising in these studies, right? In the studies whichever are done in the animals or in the in vitro studies, if the drug is found to be promising, an application called IND, that is investigational new drug, is filed with the United States Food and Drug Administration. Okay. Now after being tested in the animals and in vitro studies, remember, if the drug, right, if the drug is found to have promising results, right, if the drug is found to have the promising results, then an application is filed, right? And what is that application? An application called IND, right? What does this IND stands for? IND is investigational new drug, right? Investigational new drug is filed, right? Investigational new drug is filed. With whom? It is filed with FDA. Okay, so FDA, it stands for Food and Drug Administration, right? This organization belongs to the United States. So an application called IND is filed with the United States Food and Drug Administration. So United States Food and Drug Administration, it is a main regulatory authority, right? It is the main regulatory authority. Now, if the FDA permission is granted, then the drug is tested in the humans. Okay, so remember, if the permission is granted, right, if the permission is granted, then this particular drug, right, it is tested in humans, right? This particular drug is tested in humans, and this testing is called as, right, this testing in humans is called as the clinical trials. Okay, remember this point. Now this particular clinical trials, they are divided into 4 phases. Alright, these clinical trials, they are divided into 4 phases. That is phase 1, 2, 3 and as well as phase 4. Alright, so remember, what do you mean by this clinical trials is, like before any drug, a new drug comes to the market, it is extensively tested in animals and in vitro studies for the safety and efficacy of the drug in the humans. Now, if the drug is found to have the promising results, then an application called IND, that is called investigational new drug, is filed with the United States Food and Drug Administration. And US FDA, it is one of the main regulatory authority. Now, if the permission is granted, then drug is tested in the humans. This testing is called as the clinical trials. And the clinical trials, they are divided into 4 phases. That is phase 1, phase 2, 3 and as well as phase 4. Now let me discuss about the individual phases. That is, what is phase 1, what is phase 2, what is phase 3 and what is phase 4. Now let me discuss about what do you mean by the phase 1 trials. Right, let me discuss what do you mean by the term phase 1 trials. Remember, here the drug in phase 1 trials, the drug is tested in the normal human volunteers. Right, here drug is tested in normal human volunteers, right? The drug is tested in the normal human volunteers, right? And what will be the age of this particular normal human volunteers? It is mostly the extremes of age, right? Extremes of age. That is particularly, like, remember, elderly individuals and children, they are excluded. So except for the elderly and children, the remaining population, we consider them for the human volunteers. Okay, so remember, elderly and children, they are excluded, right? They are excluded in the phase 1 trials. Now a point what you should remember here is, here we are testing the drug in a normal human volunteer, not in the patient. So as the drug is not tested in the patient, so we cannot determine the efficacy in this phase. What are we doing in this particular phase? This is mainly for the toxicity and pharmacokinetic study of that particular drug. Okay, so the point is, the drug is not tested in the patients, right? Drug is not tested in the patients, so we cannot determine the efficacy. All right, where are we using this drug? We are using the drug in a normal individual, not in the patient. Now what is the purpose of this particular phase 1 trials? The purpose of this particular phase 1 trials, it is mainly for assessing the toxicity, right? Mainly for assessing the toxicity and pharmacokinetic, right? Mainly for assessing the toxicity and pharmacokinetic studies of this particular drug in a normal individual. Now remember, this phase 1 trials, this is the first human study, right? This is the first human study. Now what is the idea of this particular phase 1 trials? The idea of testing the new drug in normal humans is, it is based on the fact that the normal healthy persons are more likely to tolerate the adverse effect of the drug than the diseased person. Okay, so what is the idea of selecting normal healthy individuals? Right, what is the idea of selecting the normal healthy individuals is that because these normal individuals can tolerate, right, normal healthy individuals can tolerate the adverse effects of the drug than the diseased patient. Okay, that is the idea of selecting the normal healthy individual. But there is an exception for this, right? But there is an exception for this. Now for example, if you want to test the anti-cancer drugs, right? If you want to test for the anti-cancer drugs, they have unacceptable toxicity and as well as the adverse effects. Now because the anti-cancer drugs, they can produce, right? Because the anti-cancer drugs, they can produce unacceptable toxicity, all right? Because the anti-cancer drugs, they can produce unacceptable toxicity, we cannot expose the healthy humans to such a toxicity, right? Because the anti-cancer drugs can produce unacceptable toxicity, we cannot expose healthy humans, right? We cannot expose healthy humans to such particular unacceptable toxicity, right? So phase 1 trials for the anti-cancer drugs, they are done in the patients itself, right? Phase 1 trials for anti-cancer drugs, right? Phase 1 trials for the anti-cancer drugs, they are done in the patients itself, right? They are done in the patients itself. That is about your phase 1 trials, right? Phase 1 trials, they are done in a normal healthy individual. The only exception is anti-cancer drugs. We don't do in the normal healthy individual, we do directly in the patients itself. Now you take phase 2 trials, right? You take the phase 2 trials. Now if you take phase 2 trials, the drug in this phase is tested in a small number of patients, right? So the drug in this phase is tested in a small number of patients, right? And what will be that number? That is around 20 to 200 patients, right? The drug in this phase, it is tested in a small number of patients, that is around 20 to 200 patients. Now in phase 2 trial, what we are going to achieve? Remember, we can determine both the efficacy and as well as the safety in this phase, right? We will be knowing the safety of the drug and as well as, right, we will be knowing the safety and as well as the efficacy in this phase. And remember, this is first inpatient study. You take phase 1 trials, the phase 1 trials, they are first normal human being study, whereas the phase 2 trials, this is first inpatient study, right? First inpatient study, that is your phase 2 trials. So let me shortly revise about phase 1 and phase 2. Remember, you take the phase 1, here the drug is tested in a normal human volunteers, right? Extremes of age like elderly individuals and children, they are excluded in phase 1 trials. Now as the drug is not tested in the patients, so we cannot determine the efficacy in this phase. The purpose of the phase 1 is mainly for assessing the toxicity and the pharmacokinetic studies of the drug, and this is the first human study. The idea of testing the new drug is, in normal humans, it is based on the fact that the healthy persons, they are more likely to tolerate the adverse effects of the drug than the diseased persons. Now the only exception is the anti-cancer drugs. Anti-cancer drugs we don't test in the normal humans because the anti-cancer drugs, they can produce unacceptable toxicity and we cannot expose the healthy humans to such a toxicity, right? And the phase 1 trials for the anti-cancer drugs, they are done within the patients itself. And you take phase 2 trials. The drug in this phase is tested in a small number of patients, that we take a number of nearly around 20 to 200 patients, and we can determine both the efficacy and as well as safety in this phase, and this is first inpatient study. Now let me discuss about phase 3 and as well as phase 4 trials. Now let me discuss about what is called as the phase 3 trials, right? Phase 3 trials. Now if you take this phase 3 trials, remember here the drug is tested in the large number of patients, right? Here the drug is tested in the large number of patients, right? That too in the large number of patients at several centers, right? What is the purpose, right? At several centers. Okay, the purpose of testing the drug in large number of patients at several centers is to include the patients with different genetic makeup, right? So this is to include the patients with different genetic makeup, right? This is to include the patients with the different genetic makeup. Now let me tell you another important point. This particular phase 3 trials, this is done to generalize the results of the study to variable genetic and ethnic group, right? So by the end of your phase 3 trials, what you will be able to do is, like, you will able to generalize the results, right? You will be able to generalize the results of the study, right? Generalize the results of the study to variable, right? To variable genetic and ethnic groups, all right? To variable genetic and as well as the ethnic groups. Now by the end of the phase 3 trials, if you find that if the drug is found to be safe and effective in these trials, then another application is filed with the FDA, right? And that particular another application is new drug application. Okay, so if the drug is found to be effective, right? If the drug is found to be effective in these trials, then another application is filed, right? Another application is filed, right? And the name of this particular another application, So another application is filed with the FDA. Now the name of this particular application is new drug application. Alright, this is called as the new drug application. Okay, so another application is filed with the FDA to market the drug, right, to market the drug, and if approval is granted, then the drug is marketed. Okay, so if approval is granted, then the drug is marketed. Alright, so that is what is your phase 3 trials, what we do. Now you take phase 4 trials, right, you take phase 4 trials. Phase 4 trials, this is the post marketing surveillance, right. What are we doing in phase 3? We are marketing the drug, right, we are releasing the drug into the market. Once the drug has been released into the market, we do what is called as the post marketing surveillance in phase 4. So phase 4, this is post marketing, right, this is post marketing surveillance of the drug. Now what is the purpose of doing the post marketing surveillance, right? Remember, in phase 4 what we do is we try to check or we try to detect the rare adverse effects of the drug. Okay, so this is the post marketing surveillance of the drug to know, right, to know the rare adverse effects, right, to know the rare adverse effects or those occurring with the prolonged use of the drug. Okay, right, to know the rare adverse effects of the drug or to know the prolonged effects of the drug, right, that is what is we do in phase 4. Now in this phase ethical clearance is not required, right, in this phase the ethical clearance is not required, right, ethical clearance is not required in phase 4. Now remember, all phases, you take phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 and phase 4, all phases of clinical trials must follow 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞, right, all phases should follow what is called 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞. Now what is this particular 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞? GCP stands for Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, right, Good Clinical Practice Guidelines. Okay, so GCP stands for Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, given by International Conference for Harmonization. Okay, so ICH, it stands for International Conference for Harmonization, right, this is what is called as the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐺CP. Now all the phases of the clinical trials must follow 𝐒𝐮𝐺CP so that data generated is credible and interest of the patients or volunteers can be safeguarded. This is what is called as the clinical trials. Okay, so coming back to phase 3, remember, in phase 3 the drug is tested in large number of patients at several centers to include the patients with different genetic makeup, and this is done to generalize the results of the study to variable genetic and ethnic group. And if the drug is found to be safe in phase 3 trials and if it is found to be effective in these trials, then another application is filed with the FDA, that is called as new drug application, to market the drug. And if approval is granted, then the drug is marketed. In phase 4, like what we do is, this is post marketing surveillance of a drug to know the rare adverse effects or those occurring with the prolonged use of the drug. And in this phase the ethical clearance is not required. And remember, all phases of the clinical trials must follow the 𝐒𝐮𝐺CP, right, that is Good Clinical Practice Guidelines given by the International Conference for Harmonization, right. Why? So that the data generated is credible and in the interest of the patients or volunteers can be safeguarded. Now, after having discussed about all trials, let me summarize the clinical trials. Now, after discussing the clinical trials, let me tell you the summary of clinical trials. Right? Let me tell you the summary of the clinical trials. Now, you take in case of phase 1. Right? You take in case of phase 1. The phase 1, the name of this particular clinical trial is Human Pharmacology and Safety Trial. Right? The name is Human Pharmacology and Safety Trial. Right? This is what is called as the name of the phase 1 trial. Now on which group of individuals this is conducted? Remember, this is conducted on healthy volunteers. Right? This is conducted on the healthy volunteers. Right? How much we take the number? We take nearly around 2200. Right? We take nearly around 2200. Now, what is the blinding and control? Right? So, if you take the blinding and control, so if you see the blinding and control, remember it's an open label trial, right? There is no particular blinding here. The human volunteer knows that he is being tested for the drug. That is what is called as the open label, right? So it is the open label trial, right? This is the open label trial. Now, what is the purpose? Right? What is the purpose of this particular phase 1 trial? Right? The purpose of the trial, phase 1 trial, is to know the safety and to know the tolerability of the drug. Right? To know the safety and tolerability of the drug. And the other purpose is to know the maximum tolerable dose. Right? To know the maximum tolerable dose, right? That is what is the purpose of your phase 1 trial. Alright, so remember, phase 1 trials, the name of the trial is Human Pharmacology and Safety Trial, and it is conducted on the healthy volunteers of a group or of a number of 2200, and it's an open label trial. That is, the healthy volunteer knows that he is being tested for a drug, and the purpose is to know the maximum tolerable dose and to assess the safety and tolerability of the drug. Now, you take the phase 2 trials, right? You take this phase 2 trials. Phase 2 trials, the name of the trial is Therapeutic Exploratory, right? The name is Therapeutic Exploratory. That is what is called as the phase 2 trials. And remember, these phase 2 trials, they are conducted on nearly around 100 to 150 patients, right? They are conducted on 100 to 150 patients, right? And it is tested on the patients. Remember, it is not on the healthy volunteers, okay? So, and that 100 to 150 patients, like they are of the homogeneous population. That means they have similar genetic makeup, right? Homogeneous population, right? That is phase 2. Now, you take the blinding and control. It is single blind controlled trial, right? So, single blind controlled trial. Now, what do you mean by the word single blind? The investigator knows that he is testing a drug, but the patient does not know that he is being tested for a drug. That is what is called as the single blind. That means the patient is not knowing that he is being tested for the drug. That is what is called a single blind controlled trial. Now, what is the purpose of this particular phase 2 trial? To establish the therapeutic efficacy, right? To establish the therapeutic efficacy, and the other purpose is the dose ranging and the ceiling effect, right? So what should be the range of the dose? right? The dose ranging and the ceiling effect, right? The dose ranging and ceiling effect. That is what we do in phase 2. So in phase 2 trials, remember the name of it is therapeutic and exploratory trial, and it is conducted on 100 to 150 patients, that is the homogeneous population, and it's a single blinded trial, and the purpose is to establish the therapeutic efficacy, dose ranging and the ceiling effect. Now let me tell you the phase 3 trials, right? Phase 3 trials. Phase 3 trials, remember, it is therapeutic confirmatory trials, right? Therapeutic confirmatory trials. Okay, so that is your phase 3 trials. And remember, this is conducted in up to 5,000 patients, right? This is conducted in up to 5,000 patients, right? And this 5,000 patients, they are collected from several centers, right? They are collected from several centers. And remember, it is not your homogeneous population here, it is your heterogeneous population, right? It is the heterogeneous population. And now what is the blinding and control? Remember, it is double blinded, right? It is double blinded randomized control trial, right? Double blinded randomized control trial. Now what is the purpose, right? What is the purpose of this particular phase 3 trials? Remember, the purpose of the phase 3 trials is to confirm the therapeutic efficacy, right? To confirm the therapeutic efficacy and to establish the value of the drug in relation to the existing therapy. Okay. The second point is to establish the value of the drug, right, in relation to the existing therapy. Okay. So to establish the value of the drug in response to the existing therapy, right? So that is your phase 3 trials. So summarizing phase 3 trials, remember the name of this trial is therapeutic confirmatory, and it is conducted in up to 5,000 patients at several centers, and it is the heterogeneous patients. And you take it's a double blinded trial. Now what do you mean by this word double blinded trial? Remember, neither the patient knows that he is receiving a trial drug, nor the investigator does not know which patient is receiving that particular trial drug. Okay, so whereas here in phase 2 it's a single blinded trial, only the patient does not know that he is receiving a trial drug, whereas in phase 3 it's a double blinded trial. That means neither the patient does not know that he is receiving a trial drug, nor even the experimenter does not know which patient is receiving that particular trial drug. That is what is called as double blinded randomized control trial. And the purpose of this particular phase 3 trial is to confirm the therapeutic efficacy, to establish the value of the drug in relation to the existing therapy. Now you take the phase 4 trials. The name of this particular phase 4 trial is, it is post-marketing surveillance, right? It is the post-marketing surveillance. This is the name of the phase 4 trials. Now here, remember, it is conducted in large number of patients being treated by practicing physicians, right? So it is conducted on large number of patients by practicing physicians, right? That is what is your phase 4 trial. And what is the purpose? Now remember, the purpose of this particular phase 4 trials is to know the rare and the long-term adverse effects of the drug, right? The purpose is to know the rare and long-term adverse effects of the drug, right? To know the rare and long-term adverse effects of the drug. Now special groups like children, pregnancy, etc. can also be tested in phase 4. Okay, so special groups like children and pregnant individuals can be tested in phase 4 trials. So that is about your phase 4. Now after phase 1, 2, 3, 4, like we have also what is called as the phase 0 trials. Now we have what is called as the phase 0 trials. The phase 0 trials, remember the name of this particular trial is, it is microdosing study, right? It is your microdosing studies. Now this microdosing studies, it is conducted on healthy volunteers, right? It is conducted on the healthy volunteers, that too the small number, right? That too the small number. Now what is the purpose of this particular phase 0 trials? Remember, very low dose, that is 1/100th of the human dose of the drug is administered to know the pharmacokinetics. So here what we are trying to do is, right, very low dose is given, and how much is that particular low dose? 1/100th of the human dose is given, that is maximum we give 100 micrograms, right? So maximum we give 100 micrograms. So what is the purpose? So very low dose of the drug is administered to know the pharmacokinetics of the drug, right? To know the pharmacokinetics of the drug, and this could avoid the costly phase 1 studies for candidate drugs with unsuitable pharmacokinetics, right? So the purpose of phase 0 is to know what is the pharmacokinetics of that particular drug, and this is what is called as the microdosing studies, which is done on the healthy volunteers, and it is done in a small number of patients.